welcome to the first ever episode of the South Asian Occupational Therapy Experience. I'm Sheela Ivlev, and joining me today are Sujata Martin, Priya Raveendran, and Dr. Sakshi Tickoo. So I want to ask you all to just take a moment and introduce yourselves.
Hi everyone, I am Sujata Martin. I am an Indian American occupational therapist based in Buffalo, New York. I identify with a few labels. I would say Indian American is very new, with me being officially American just last November, less than a year actually. So, very much still Indian at heart. Brand new American. Other labels I identify with as she, her. I'm a mother. I'm a pelvic floor therapist. I love pelvic floor work. I have a private practice treating primarily women in pelvic health. And I love doing this. I love reaching people with more information about occupational therapy, more information about what I do, and more information about, you know, culturally sensitive care, I suppose. So I'm so glad, Sheila, that, you invited me here. So thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks so much for being here.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya. I am a third year OT student here in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. And I'm currently working as an OT assistant and as a support worker. I identify as a Sri Lankan Tamil, but I was born in Singapore and raised in Melbourne, so there's a lot going on. I also identify as she, her, and I'm really excited to be here and to be speaking with some really cool South Asian OTs. And yeah, really excited.
Awesome. Thanks, Priya.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Sakshi Tickoo, a cisgender, queer, brown occupational therapist. I was born and raised here in Mumbai, and I am a Mumbai based occupational therapist who loves to talk about everything sexuality, mental health, wellness, rehabilitation, and all the other awesome stuff. Um, since I have been starting with my practice as so I continue working as a school-based OT for about like a year. I'm a new grad practitioner. But I recently started my private practice with Sex Love and OT, where I address more about sexuality and all the other good stuff that I mentioned. And I think that has been one of the ways that I could have connected with more South Asian OTs, and not just from India, but global South Asian OTs. And I think that is exactly how we all have landed together in this picture and in this podcast. So thank you, Sheila, for having this here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I love that we're South Asian, but we're spread all over the globe. So it's amazing that we're able to connect this way. So I'm Sheila. I identify as she, her. I am first generation American. My parents are from India, and I have a wellness-based occupational therapy practice that is fully virtual right now, thanks to COVID, but that's given me some time to be able to work on some of these other projects that I think are absolutely important, just to me and especially to our profession. So today we're going to be talking about challenging culture-based occupation in a Western frame from a South Asian perspective. So that's kind of a mouthful, but I wanted to start off with some like basic trivia facts about South Asia. So the countries that are included in South Asia include Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So the population in South Asia is about 1.9 billion. And then across the diaspora, there are about 24 million of us. We speak over 650 languages, and the predominant religions that we practice are Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism. And it's important to note that our cultures have been influenced over the centuries from invasions from different nations, trade, as well as colonization. So we might be a very small region, but we represent great cultural, ethnic and linguistic diversity. So I think we'll learn that like each of us has different perspectives despite being from the same region. So Sujata, would you like to start with the history of occupational therapy?
So as far as health professions go, occupational therapy is, without a bias, I can say almost as holistic, as open to people's identities and meeting people where they're at as any medical profession that I have either worked with or known about, interacted with as a patient or as a colleague. So I would say, as far as a health profession, we are already set up to identify and relate with people where they are. But recognizing that occupational therapy as a profession originated in the Western world, or what we think of as the Western world, in the US, UK, Canada, with a lot of the founders or the founding fathers, founding mothers of occupational therapy being white American therapists who did fabulous, fantastic work that was meaningful to the population that they were working with, again, predominantly white Americans. And a lot of the literature we are using right now to educate future OTs, a lot of the literature we refer back to when designing interventions are again based in those origins, in that Western white identity. So when we do treatment planning or when we do assessments, there is, and this is my experience being an occupational therapist in mostly urban and suburban United States, how we have been trained to assess and treat is with this big focus on independence, on ADL independence, on IADL independence. And oftentimes, because of how we have almost been indoctrinated with this kind, okay, this is your focus of treatment, this is what your treatment should revolve around. We, even I have done this mistake being a South Asian occupational therapist myself, is I've forgotten sometimes to understand, like, hey, though, is this really relevant to this person's context? And again, I'm hoping that through this medium we reach therapists who want to help their clients from diverse backgrounds, including South Asians. And as Sheila, you've identified, South Asians are now everywhere in the globe, maybe possibly without Antarctica, maybe too cold for us, but besides that, we're almost everywhere. So no matter where you're listening in from, you probably are going to have some South Asian clients. So having an understanding of our culture is going to help you relate to your client better, is going to help you design more relevant interventions, get better outcomes, but because you're going to get better buy-in from your client. So again, remembering that the origins have of this profession are mostly from a white Western identity, and a lot of the frameworks we think of, let's see, like the OT domain and framework process, even if we consider that, a lot of how those areas are broken down, there is very little emphasis, I will say, in that towards like social support systems. It is definitely mentioned, but for someone, and again, I'm speaking for someone who is South Asian, who identifies as Hindu, and I'm sure all of you have input on this as well. For most South Asians across religious identities, across if they grew up in rural areas, if they grew up in urban areas, family structure, social support, interdependence is much more important. And that is why when I was in OT school, the Kava model of occupational therapy practice really resonated with me. I'm like, there, that is how you will work with me, because that makes sense to me, where it's a whole a life process kind of model, where you take into consideration all these factors, not necessarily just the physical environment, and can this person get their shoes on, can they tie their laces, versus compared to breaking up into tasks of that nature. I really appreciated how it truly took into consideration and left flexibility, honestly, because what is my social support system is going to be very different from another South Asian person's support system who lives in a joint family, who lives in the same home with their in-laws and their cousins and things like that. Their social support systems are going to be totally different. Or, for example, at the other extreme, I would say, still an anomaly. I'm a South Asian and I'm married to an American, white American. So again, people often make the assumption with me that, oh, didn't you have an arranged marriage? You know, so again, just because someone looks a certain way doesn't mean that they are going to fit into this typecast identity we create for them. So I love the Kava model for instance, for that reason, because again, it gives you this open structure to fit that person's life context in when you design an intervention. So just something to consider for OT practitioners, for OT students listening to this, that what we learn in our textbooks, what your supervisor or fieldwork coordinator is teaching you may not necessarily be relevant to our to the diaspora, to immigrant populations. And again, where we are located in the United States, I'm guessing a lot of our listeners are going to be from here. We are receiving, again, I'm sure, a lot of refugee influx, a lot of immigrant influx with all the changes happening in the world. So we need to be comfortable providing culturally competent care. So that's very important to recognize. And also, I wanted to mention is that it's wonderful that a lot of professions are recognizing the cultural differences and how they affect health outcomes or how they affect like patient goals. But there is this focus on cultural competence, and that has made me laugh, honestly, because how can you be competent in a culture that you have never lived in for a single day of your life? You
Thank
know,
you.
there goes that patriarchal mindset again of I know better than you. I am competent in your culture, you know? So that itself is that whole God complex that often exists in healthcare systems where the provider is, oh, I am the boss person, you do what I tell you. It kind of perpetuates that, the idea of cultural competence. So if we shift that and think of cultural sensitivity or cultural humility in that, hey, I know something about your culture. This is what I know. How does this apply to you? Is this relevant to you? That would make more sense. And that would help us give our clients better care. That would help us be better therapists because you connect with your patient better, and just to make it real, I have a relative, kind of like a second, third relation, like an in-law relation based in the United States. Now, she's an older lady. She's in her 70s now, had a knee surgery, had an inpatient rehab stay with both PT and OT. For those familiar with rehab systems in the United States, you get for like 2 or 3 weeks, you get both therapy disciplines, about 30 to 60 minutes of intensive rehab. And the poor lady, and this could be, again, this could be completely her fault. I'm not trying to place blame, but the focus of rehab is so much on range of motion. Can you get your shoes on? Like she told me, they kept making me get my shoes on. And that wasn't relevant to her. She lives with her sons, adult sons, who are more than happy to help her. Doing her laces, using a sock aid wasn't relevant to her. If you had told her, hey, how will you sit down and do your puja? How will you sit down in the temple for your prayers? Or you have your granddaughter, how will you play with her on the floor? If that was the kind of intervention that was used, I'm sure you would have gotten better compliance. So again, that's what I mean by how cultural sensitivity or cultural humility can improve outcomes. It would definitely have improved her outcome. So this person then had to get a revision because the first one didn't work well, it wasn't rehabbed well, just poor outcomes for the client. And then as a therapist, as a care provider, you don't feel as good. Then you feel like, hey, I missed something out, I didn't do as good a job. So I think that conversations like these are very important. And again, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement that has been happening in the United States, we've seen a lot of positive change where important conversations about race and racially sensitive care and culturally sensitive care is happening, which is wonderful. And not just in the US, it has kind of popped up in other areas also. Like I'm connected with my family still lives in India, and there definitely is a lot of like colorism in Indian society. Again, a different conversation, but there is improvement coming over there because of like BLM conversations happening here. So the ripple effect, and again, I'm hoping that this conversation creates that ripple where a practitioner listening or a student listening is able to provide some more culturally relevant care to their patient, to their client. And I hope that they feel comfortable asking the right questions and not feel awkward or hesitant in bringing up these questions to their clients. So again, recognize where OT came from. Remember to recognize that what our textbooks say may not be relevant to our client. Remember that you cannot be competent in a culture you have not lived in, that you have not experienced firsthand, no matter what books you read, and keep it centered around them. No person is going to mind a very respectful question of what matters to you. Is this relevant to you? What would you want to work on? And bring that into your treatment. So that's my little piece. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Sujata. There's like so much to unpack there, but I have to start with kind of like what's at the top of my head. I want to ask everybody here, as South Asians, who wears shoes in their house? I would love to hear which one of you wears shoes in the house.
No, nobody.
Yeah.
No.
What are
Yeah.
shoes? You just can't wear them inside the house.
Right.
So we have modernized to wearing socks, but then that's just like a desperate attempt at saying, oh, we are going to have flagged heels. That's it. No shoes.
Yeah. So like, when you're thinking of culturally relevant interventions, if you're in a facility and you're doing something every day, if you're a 70-plus-year-old person and you're not super active outside of the home, or if you're leaving the home, like you said, somebody's going to be helping you, maybe you don't need to put the shoes on because you're not going to wear them in the home. So that was one piece, but I wanted to take a step back and you started off by talking about how holistic we are, right? But then you have this juxtaposition of we're very holistic, but we only look at the individual person and we only look at their independence, and we're not really taking into consideration for so many people in the world, as well as wherever you're practicing, because we are a global community, right? There are immigrants of multiple generations in every single country, right? So South Asians were absolutely everywhere. And so, if you aren't looking at the family systems, if you aren't looking at the community, if you aren't looking at, there might be multiple generations within one home that is part of your own identity, like, how do you separate that? So maybe I can pose this to Priya, because you are a practitioner and you're also a student. So, you have your South Asian background, you're practicing as an OT assistant, and then you're also learning these principles in school. So just, how does like all that hit you?
So I do think about like, oh, like before I, go to their house, like for example, I ask them like, is it okay if I can wear my shoes in here? Like, because that's also something that's important for, and I don't know, like it kind of, I've sort of had to think about those things outside of what I've been taught at uni. Like I haven't really been aside from kind of talking a little bit about cultural competence in like the broad scheme of things, a lot of like the case studies and the clients that we come across, they're not they more often than not don't have a different cultural background. They're more often than not of like Australian, or they're just white. Like yeah, so I don't know, it's kind of I suppose there's a lot of independence for me in terms of learning how to be culturally aware and practice cultural competence, because it's not really something that is covered in detail in my studies.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say,
Yeah.
I hate case studies. Like, it's absolutely absurd to come up with this like case scenario and assume that everybody with that identity acts that way or lives that way, right? Like, we've already established that South Asians are very different. There are South Asians that wear their shoes in their house. I'm sure there are. I don't know them,
Yeah.
but they exist, right? So like these case studies, like I don't know if anybody has propositions of like how else you can learn. Obviously we've identified, just freaking ask somebody, right? Like, ask them what's important to them, ask them how they live, ask them if this is okay to do or not. But outside of case studies, like, how else can we learn these things? Because the books only teach you one way, and like you said, OT was made by and for middle to upper class white people, and that's who's still in those case studies. That's still who's represented in the books and the assessments and the interventions and everything.
Yeah, I do want to actually mention that so I'm currently doing an online placement and it's all about case studies. So it's probably be horrible for you, Sheila.
Yeah.
And there's about like 23, 24 case studies in the list of kind of like in the website where we get them from. And there is like all of the clients are of like an Australian, like white Australian background. And I was kind of, just a little bit disappointed because there's so many case studies there. Like, you've gone to the effort of putting in so many case studies, but how come there is no cultural diversity here? So yeah, I was, a bit bummed about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I'm going off topic, but this is online. We are a global community. Our profession's
Yeah.
103 years old. Like, I think it's time to catch up. Why can't you do a case study with an actual person, right? Like, why can't I show up as a case study and you can actually ask me as a human questions? Like, why does it have to be this book where you fill in blanks? And we all know we see things from our own lens, right? So if you're filling in blanks, you're filling in blanks based on what you know, not necessarily the reality of the other person.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like, how like Kamala Harris has just been elected as vice president. And a lot of I've seen a lot of like videos of like on Instagram and just like social media of people being like, hey, she looks like me. So like a lot of the time I'm like, why isn't there anyone that looks like me in my like case studies? Like, why is that not explored? I don't get it.
Right. I mean, representation is going to help diversify our profession, right? So more people can see themselves as OTs, but also, when we're talking about racial disparities in healthcare and like treating people equitably, right? If you don't know how to treat a person from a different background, that's when you have all these issues. Sakshi, I wanted to ask from your perspective as a South Asian actually living in South Asia, is there anything that you wanted to add to this conversation?
It's completely strange because even though people think that I'm here, it's for me, I had to unlearn like a bunch of stuff. So the moment I started with my private practice, I was actually strangely more people outside of India started connecting with me through Instagram. So even though I had established something within India, being an Indian, there was the connectivity, or it seemed more relatable to people outside of here. And that's where the whole tricky part became, because i was I'm a 100% trained practitioner and a student in understanding how I can deal with any Indian or any person from who has some sort of a cultural diversity based in India, right? So I know that I'm 100% trained in that. But the moment I started having students or clients who wanted to seek help with these areas of sexuality, I was I was scared because nobody was telling us that this is something that could happen. There could be somebody, even though we are in India, I think there could be somebody outside of this place that you could be talking to or speaking to someday. And Sujata rightly, when she said cultural competence, and I'm so sorry that I learned about cultural fluidity so late, that and that is when I realized that the competence has got nothing to do with it, because I'm still sitting in India. So I am culturally competent. In a way, I am, at least for my culture. But then what I lack is a cultural fluidity, because I know absolutely everything about what South Asia has to offer. But it's just like a tiny part of it, right? There's still an entire globe that's still over there. And I have absolutely no idea about it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, we've had a conversation about this before. Your education was actually a very Western OT education, even though your practice is in South Asia, right?
Exactly, exactly. So we had case studies about white people. Interventions were done on brown people. And that is how it went. And it makes absolutely zero sense. It makes absolutely zero sense. So we have the opportunity of having more hands-on cases where people are our case studies. However, they were asking, so initially, like when you still do not have a lot of contact and you are still thinking about what models and approaches do you want to use, we still are clueless about all of these things, because the case studies that we get to refer to, or any case studies basically on the internet, is about a white person and how that white person has been treated, which absolutely makes no sense in an Indian context to my client or to me.
Yeah, so you really actually have to practice that cultural humility, that cultural sensitivity and responsiveness, because like everything you learn doesn't apply to your clientele.
Exactly. Just like the way I kept telling people that we have to ask pronouns before we meet our client, I made sure that I take out those 15 minutes separately to understand their culture, so that I'm not missing something out. And I can still go back. I can still understand what are the things that they do in their culture if my client is very hesitant to tell me about it. I know certain things, they can tell me certain things, so that I'm better prepared to serve them. And those questions can get really awkward, and for them initially it does not make any sense, but then throughout the rehabilitation process, it just makes me more grateful about them, and it makes them realize that this is how it's supposed to be done. And because nobody's going to ask you questions about your ethnicity or what cultural background you're from, or how religious you are, what spirituality means to you. There's so many components to it. And even though we have these models made up saying that this is about Canadian model, this is how it is, there will be a spirituality core, there will be a social core, there'll be a cultural core, we aren't really questioning them about any of these things, and how much it matters to them. So and it becomes so shocking for them that somebody's actually going to ask them these intrusive questions. But at the end of the day, it genuinely does help.
Yeah, and that's like the perfect segue. Priya, you're going to be talking a little bit about the importance of identity.
I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about how important cultural identity is to mainly the South Asian diaspora, and I suppose people who are kind of in my age range as well. So I'm 22 and I'm going through kind of a little bit of I don't know, maybe a dilemma of, well, how much do I identify as a Sri Lankan Tamil and how much do I identify as an Australian? Because I do relate to aspects of both cultures. And that kind of just has got me thinking a lot. And we recently completed a subject on mental health, and part of that focused on youth mental health. And well, we kind of didn't really touch on that at all, how differences in identity can, or like within ourselves, can kind of clash and can be really difficult to kind of figure out. And I suppose I'm not even really sure if it's something that you do figure out until you're a lot older, but it's kind of, I feel like around this age that I'm at is where a lot of people start thinking about that kind of thing, and that can lead to a lot of things like anxiety and just confusion and even depression. And I know that it's like just something that a lot of people battle with. So I was really confused as to why it wasn't really spoken about when I was studying. And Of course, this is all kind of reflection in hindsight. Like as I was studying, it was just like, okay, yeah, like this is what I'm being taught, so I'm not going to question it. Like you guys have mentioned, like it's kind of just provided, like it's in the textbook, that's how we do it. We're not going to question it. So, you know, as of more recently, having conversations with people like you and people on pages like Students and OTs of Colour on Facebook, you know, it's really opened my mind into kind of thinking about these sorts of things. And yeah, I just wanted to touch on that and maybe hear a little bit about your perspectives in terms of when you were studying as to become OTs. Was cultural identity something that was touched on a lot or not as much? Or yeah, I'm just really keen to know.
Yeah, I want to share, Priya. So I think, I believe, Sujata and Sakshi, you can tell us if you feel the same way, but I was born and raised in one country. My parents are from another, and my mom grew up telling me that I am not American. Like she would remind me constantly that I am not American. So I've had this, like, I'll call it a cultural crisis, really, right? Like I'm multicultural and I'm 38 now, and I still have these issues. And like the more that I learn about how like colonization and how my ancestral culture is very different than like the generational cultures of my parents and my grandparents, you know, I'm stuck here like, what's going on? Who am I? I'm not Indian enough. I'm not American enough. Like, where do I fit in? So you're definitely not, you're not alone. And I feel like this happens with different age groups. And, you know, I guess it hits you when it hits you, and it probably hits you again. So I wanted to see if anybody else, I know, Sujata, you studied and practiced in India for a little bit, and then you came to the United States. So I'm sure you have the same, like, you know, cultural identity, like clashes or crises, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, to an extent for sure. The One of the big things I ran into initially was again what Sakshi experienced a little bit in like how I was educated was we use reachers and sockets. And again, while my practice in India and while doing my field works there, I had never seen a reacher till I stepped foot in the United States. But almost every OT textbook we open, there's the hip kit, the reacher, the socket, blah blah blah, and I could never wrap my head around it. And I'm like, really, this is what we do? You know, it just felt like silly to me because it was not relevant to what we did. And so for me, just like Sakshi mentioned, I had to learn and become competent or become sensitive to the culture here. On that, like, hey, people here, like the average white American, really puts independence on a pedestal. So that reacher is very relevant because I was like, why won't they just have their grandkid pick it up, you know, or leave it till someone else can do it, you know? So I had to do that learning in that way. And I also faced this in our therapy community from some faculty, and not in a bad way per se, but there definitely is this white savior identity that we see a lot in the rehab profession. I know a lot of universities encourage like mission trips and things to like this other parts of the world, but it's often in I know they are helping, they are providing very important skills, but I hope that these students and these professionals see like they're gaining something in return. I hope that is there because the way I felt it, like I remember doing this one wheelchair seating and positioning class, and the professor was talking about how it is so innovative where they have standing wheelchairs that elevate a person so they can come up to like cupboard height and open things and access things, and then they can go over curbs, which is very innovative and which is very it's great advances in technology. It's very very relevant. At the same time, they asked for examples, and I thought it was very innovative and very creative. And again, very relevant to our context. Like I studied in Mumbai, where Sakshi did as well. We are resource rich in certain ways, but not in other ways. The place I studied, it was attached to a government run hospital, which provided like no cost or extremely low cost treatment to people who couldn't afford private therapy services or private healthcare. So a great system, but in the end, the often therapists had to make do and innovate to provide things that these patients could not afford. So I literally have seen therapists make wheelchairs from lawn chairs. They would dismantle bicycles, attach them to a lawn chair, like a plastic lawn chair, and there's a transport wheelchair for the patient, something the patient can afford, locally sourced material. It can go over the surfaces in their environment. It is waterproof, has no moving parts that will get rusted in the wet environment of, Mumbai. And I thought that was amazing. And it seemed like my class wasn't impressed at all. My professor wasn't impressed. They were just like, what? You think that's innovation? A lawn chair with wheels? But, to me, that is like how resourceful of that first therapist who thought of that, to provide such a low quality intervention so it's accessible to so many people. And then again, the client, when they're receiving that, they don't feel like, oh my God, I'm receiving such a huge favor. This is like oftentimes the things the patient themselves sourced. So again, when we are working with someone who doesn't have the economic resources, we meet them where they are at. That is still a technologically advanced intervention in a way, in that context. So I also hope that if there are faculty members or fieldwork coordinators listening to this who organize those trips, and they provide very valuable services by either providing one-on-one intervention to people who are in distant communities or in communities where there aren't as many therapists as there is need for rehabilitation. I hope they realize that, you know, you are providing valuable service, but I hope they get something in return. I hope they like that whole savior complex just throws me off a little. And again, meeting people where they are at and recognizing that, again, what we think as important may not be as important. That difference in identity I felt is that people automatically thought that because I'm from a country that is thought of as second or third world in this part of the world, that automatically interventions from there weren't as advanced or weren't as deserving of merit. It was like poor people stuff. I don't know what to call it, but just because of where it came from, it wasn't as respected as something else that came from like a Western context.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing those points up. Again, like so much to unpack. The saviorism, especially, right? Like people kind of don't want to go there and don't want to talk about it, but like that is our profession. Like let's be real, social work, OT. We help people, we help them be independent because we don't think they can do it themselves. That's the reality. There's like, I'm going to go a little bit off topic, and there has actually been a lot of information on like these wheelchairs, right? People donate and bring wheelchairs to these different countries to help people with mobility issues. But then what ends up happening is these places that they like donate to teach people how to use them, they don't have the resources to fix and replace parts, and so these become like completely obsolete, completely useless. And people who either like had a functional way or like a way of working with their community to be able to access the outside, they kind of lose that connection, and then here they're stuck with this like piece of crap that doesn't work, that they can't do anything with. In my mind, I'm like, saviorism is when somebody doesn't ask you for help and you think they need help, right? Like, are you really looking at how they're functioning? Do they need this? Is it what you think they need?
Yes. Yeah, just to add a little bit there, I had this wonderful colleague, wonderful heart, coming from the best intentions. She would do mission trips to India specifically, and she would ask me, oh, where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. And every time she went, she would literally take like 8 or 10 manual wheelchairs. Like each of these chairs weigh a good like 50, 60 pounds. So that's like
Yeah.
120, 130 like kilos. That's hard. to navigate over like uneven surfaces. Some roads are not even tarred. It is such an obsolete, like it's like burning, setting fire to your money. If you truly wanted to help people, you would help them like set up, use those funds in a way that they could develop it using local resources. So again, it is very well intentioned, but clearly no one in that program, no one in that mission trip bothered to ask the program director in that location, hey, do you really need these heavy ass wheelchairs to be shipped all the way across continents to give to you, where your patients probably can't use it anyway? They probably can't go even over the curb. They probably can't leave their home in it. It was such like well intentioned, but a useless intervention.
Sakshi, do you have any thoughts on like the juxtaposition of cultures, or some of us coming in and saving Indians?
I was going to add to what Sujata said because there's this whole idea. Even when we are here in India, we have this idea about how amazing the Western culture is, or how we need to transform ourselves within that culture so that we sort of just get more acceptable. And that example of getting a wheelchair from, like, getting it imported from outside or sort of giving it to clients, it's just a way of telling them that we are as advanced as physiotherapy. That is the line that has been constantly used when we're sort of talking about occupational therapy, or even when we are trying to introduce aids into occupational therapy practice. And the whole idea, aids were supposed to be complementary, right? They We sort of make it low cost because there are people who can't afford anything. They are practically receiving therapy at a free cost. And at that point of time, you sort of introduce a Western culture where they are saying that people can get it covered with insurance there. They have facilities of sort of they it just get sort of laid off. They do not have monetary issues, not something that they really need to care about, which is not the situation here. And practically most of the things that happen, even with the whole cultural identity here, comes from the idea that, do we still want to make our interventions look US based? So they need to be like American certified for them to be acceptable in a South Asian community. I particularly speak for an Indian community, but that is the whole picture. Once it's US certified, it is India certified indirectly. When you're still trying to absorb information and trying to understand what happens, um, for me, for the longest time, whatever US said, or anything, any research article that US thought was deemed worthy of, being published, putting out there as research or evidence-based practice, I thought, yes, this is exactly what it is. When when we actually started practicing, none of the things that were there that I could have applied into my practice. So it's like it's sort of like, even though we are not there, we are still living in a identity crisis here, which is not even called for.
Yeah, I mean, like I won't go in too far into history, but like, if you look at specifically Indian culture, right, we were colonized, right? So we really do, even if people won't admit it, like we really do look up to that like white dominant culture. That's how we were brought up. Most of South Asia does have that influence. And so like, whether we are aware of it or willing to admit it or not, like that American or Western white culture is like what we aspire to do, to be, and we don't even question it when we're like stripping our own identities to conform to it. Like, there's really no other way to say it.
It's a different kind of crisis, and we don't even need it. We
Yeah.
already have so much to deal with, and I don't know. It's a different kind of crisis that I personally did not think would be happening. Like, going back to where I said that, just learning cultural fluidity sitting in my house in Mumbai, I did not see that kind of a cultural crisis, right? That was not something that I was looking forward to, or I, would have thought that this could have happened. So just the basis of like starting where we had started, just the whole sensitivity the lack of sensitivity or just the conscious awareness that this is something that could have happened can just have such a, like, it just has such a bad takeover on the way that we sort of have our perception, and what identities do we hold, or what meaning culture holds just for us. I think even just as a human, as a practitioner, let's not even go there, but even as a person, I think it's quite different.
Yeah, so now that we've established that we're all completely confused about our cultural identities, how do we address occupations with a cultural context, knowing that we're absolutely all over the place?
So for me, I think there was this one point when I was still in my final year. I was actually having a word with one of my clients, uh, diagnosed with schizophrenia, but then a really great chef. He owned a bakery here and used to make all of these things. And we sort of got into conversation, and I was talking to him as to why did he choose baking. So he was quite aware. He had good insight of that he has schizophrenia, but was admitted every now and then whenever he had some hallucination episodes. So when we started talking about, what does baking mean to him, how has it helped him to, manage his medications with his symptoms and everything else, um, it was such a beautiful experience to see him talk about occupations and meaning in in, in a completely different way. And and that is when, because we have this habit of sort of asking clients to just socialize, and it's basically interventions that were imposed. We were not really thinking our interventions through, that this is supposed to be client centered, but rather any mental health intervention was generalized. So everybody will be playing Karen, everybody will be doing gardening, which does not make sense to him. And and he constantly kept saying no to all of these things because he was not interested in gardening. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense. He is a chef, he owns a bakery, and that is what adds meaning to his life. And while gardening can be a great hobby, everybody was like perfectly fine with socializing and etc etc. The meaning that an occupation held for him and the way that it transformed his life, even with his diagnosis, was something that made me realize that there are two types of occupations that we are looking into in a culture-based setup. One is something that we do on a daily basis, like it's a routine. It's like a, I wouldn't say it's a burden. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but then it's like a responsibility that has been thrown on you, and you're doing it just because it's supposed to be done. And others actually hold some meaning for you. And the differentiation and understanding that there, even in a culture, first of all, culture-based occupations, boo, mind-blowing. But then understanding that these occupations can digress to such different paths, where some of them is just a routine for them, which makes no sense to them, but are supposed to be done. And some of them are actually really, really meaningful for them. And this is how they want to continue their life. And this is what gives them purpose, or sort of, keeps them going ahead. And for some of them, a routine, even with, and I think this was like, I still find it more highlighted in sexuality and mental health practices. It could be different for any other practice, honestly it could be. But then this this aspect is just so can be so beautifully highlighted, especially in these practice areas, because even even when I was talking to clients with substance use, and for them, just getting back to, like, switching from alcohol to have eating chewing gum 10 times in a day just to satisfy whatever oral needs we are talking about made no sense. And at some point, if you could have told them that it's okay, it's an occupation. I mean, you are talking about alcohol to a North Indian. They're basically married. You cannot separate that. And some of it does come from your culture, some of it does comes from, like, like can I say genetics? I'm not sure. I would like to believe so, but I think even genetics and cultural background, it is going to be there. That is exactly how you are raised. And and the memories, or sort of your experience that have been associated with some of these some of these things, alcohol is just like one of those things. But then we have this clear-cut idea of this is an occupation that's not supposed to be done, which which is really not up to us to decide. Honestly, if it's not hurting or harming anybody, I think it's not up to us to decide that this occupation is not supposed to be done. So even for meaning, in in a routine occupation or in a meaningful occupation is something that should be given to the client, and we honestly aren't giving it to them. At least I I understood that as a student that we weren't, and it was so unfair. It was so unfair not to not let them have the kind of, just the space to express themselves and to express what meaning and purpose actually means to them. For a 60-year-old here, past that, oh, you can do this is your ADL, you have to continue doing this, you can go out for a walk, you can go out and talk to your friends. He doesn't care about that. He said, I'm old, I've done my work, I'm going to sit at home and chill. You don't tell me what I'm supposed to do, which is fair, which is fair. And it's moments like these when we were like stripped down from like the clients actually took it on themselves that you are not the boss of me. And even in such a setup where people actually consider therapists and doctors as gods, we do that in India. There have been people who have touched our feet saying that thank you for doing this, we are better now. So from from being considered as a god to being told that you are not the boss of us, that it like there has been such a like a spectrum of experiences that just tell you that we are still forgetting the whole basis and the foundation that human engagement will give you purpose and it will add meaning to your life, as long as you allow the client to you're giving them the power to decide that this is what is meaningful, this is my occupation, and you don't get to decide what's right and what's wrong.
I'm thinking about people that are listening that may not have been exposed to South Asian culture, might not, have had clients or patients or even like friends that they've interacted with. And so, here we are saying, okay, like these are some things to consider if you're working with people from a South Asian background. And then we're like, but at the same time, we're also saying like this individual is very, very different. And so like, I think navigating that space, if you're not comfortable, if you're not really familiar with our background, like what are some things that people like advice that you have or some considerations? Like, I think one thing we kept saying is just ask people. Like, it's really not that complicated. Like, just ask people. But still, sometimes like thinking about like making sure that I'm saying it in a respectful way. Am I asking something that might offend somebody? So like, what are some considerations to be able to be providing like culturally responsive care, but at the same time recognizing that we aren't monolithic?
For From my experience, how I sort of work, even with clients who are not just based in or just South Asian clients or Asian clients, anybody else, I really, really like to question them, saying that, oh, I have previously had a client with this cultural ethnicity, and I'm not really sure. So they had something of this things, and this is what mattered to them. Is it how it's for you, or if not, you can just walk me through what culture matters to you, or how like a typical day looks for you, what purpose or meaning things hold for you, etc., etc. It's like activity analysis, but on the client's entire life. That's all. So rather than just one activity, you are just trying to talk about what holds meaning for them and what isn't. And sometimes I like to come clean, saying that I haven't worked with a client of this culture, and so if you think that there's something really important for me to know about your culture that holds some meaning and importance to you, please let me know, because there are some culturally sensitive things, because for us this is what matters and it may not matter to you. So let me know if I'm making a complete fool of myself and I'm doing something that does not really matter to you. So just come forward, have a word. It always starts awkward. I mean, there's no other way to do it. It's always awkward. There's a random person talking to a random person, and you're sort of asking them all of these personal life questions. Nobody knows how to answer them, especially if four of us are here. We are already having this cultural crisis, and we go back to some other therapist, and they are asking all of these personal questions. I'm like, just shut up! Don't ask me all of these questions. But eventually, it all adds up. and it's just like a 10-minute awkwardness, but it makes huge difference if you're going to see this patient or a person long term.
Yeah, and I think that that piece about being humble, recognizing like in this instance, and my opinion is in every instance, I don't think we're the experts. I don't care what degree you have and how many years of experience you have. The person that you are working with has lived their life longer than you have been working with them or possibly doing what you're doing, right? So you know, those are just things like be humble. It's okay to do something wrong. It's okay to ask from a place of humility.
I love what Sakshi said about just coming out and asking that question about, hey, this is what is important to you. But you can also kind of pick up cues from the person's environment. For instance, when you first walk into the house, do you see other shoes by the door? Then you understand the expectation is to take your shoes off. For instance, I did have a coworker who was extremely offended because how can they tell me to take my shoes off? I don't know if the house is clean. And it just put me back a bit like, did you see if they were wearing any footwear? I'm sure, or she said something like, oh, where do they think I have been, you know? So it wasn't understanding, it wasn't a commentary on her hygiene or her shoes being dirty, but just take a look around, you know, it seems like this is what everyone does, you know. So take cues from the environment, keep it open ended, and ask, you know, ask questions. I will say though, most South Indian cultures have this very strong sense of like interdependence with their families, most of them. And again, there's always exceptions to the rule. And there is this idea of like respect or showing or giving thanks in kind to care providers. So to care providers like doctors, health professionals such as therapists, and often 9 times out of 10, when you are done treating, a South Asian family will try to feed you. They'll try to give you food. They will try and send you back with something. I've heard like traditional Italian families are the same way. We are very proud about our food. And so I would say, even if you are not sure how good the food is, if Indian food gives you heartburn or Pakistani food gives you heartburn, say thank you, take it, dump it if you have to, but don't say no, you know, because that becomes like a very personal thing. Because for that patient, it's like the least they can do, you know, like they are so thankful, they're so happy to have you, especially if you're doing things like home care. I did home care for a while, and there would be people who would want to come and you have to sit and eat with me, and I would just be like, this person doesn't wash their hands after going to the bathroom. I don't know if I want to eat this. So I would be like, can I have it to go? I have someone waiting for me. And then so again, you know, be tactful when you have to. So if you are met with a South Asian family of that sort, you know, take it. Don't say no to, of course, again, employers will have rules about gifts you can accept and things like that, because people will try to give you gifts. Again, it's a very like generous kind of culture. We like to show love, we like to show respect, we like to show thanks. So accept what you can. Look at your environment, take cues from that. And again, this, I would say, one additional thing, it honestly applies across cultures to people. For instance, just an example for me, when I did home care, where you would have to at the beginning of the day call your patient and be like, hey, I have you on the schedule for 10 o'clock, can I come see you for your session? So there was this African American patient, a female patient in her 60s, chronic cardiac condition, and she was known to be like quote unquote bad patient, would not open the door, would not answer her phone, multiple early discharges from therapy for non-compliance. So, and she came to my caseload. I was the newbie. I got stuck with like the tough patient, you know, who never answers the phone. So she answered the phone, she saw me, and then I kind of had that background of, hey, this person doesn't like to engage in therapy. So I just talked to her and asked what was important to her. I saw pictures in her home of her husband. So I asked her, hey, you know, how did you meet? And she talked about dancing. And I'm like, this is a great intervention. So instead of sitting there and doing like shoulder flexion, shoulder abduction, we start doing some dancing. And guess who saw me 2 times a week for every week? You know, she never canceled a session. So again, keeping that relevant to the person. So it wasn't like she was being bad, she was being non-compliant. It just didn't make sense to her. She's a heart patient. She gets out of breath, and you said tell her to do weights and exercises, TheraBand. She's like, I'm not like wasting my 2 good hours of the day on this. So again, I feel like from this discussion, I hope people take this information back and not just apply it to like South Asian populations, but to other populations. Again, think like, hey, what could be relevant to this person? You know, trying to think of it that way, just because again we are such a diverse community. Though I will say, being South Asian, being Indian, Sri Lankan, we are a lot more advantaged than other immigrant populations, at least in the US. Like we are seeing a lot of immigrants coming from the Middle East who may not have the resources, or who may not have this language that you and all of us have, to put forth and share this information with others, that hey, this is what my culture does, or this, you cannot be competent in my culture. They may not feel empowered to say that, because of, I don't know, their immigration status, or however they feel. Maybe they're not competent in English, maybe their primary language is something else. So again, it's very important, I think, Sheila, what you're doing, this conversation. But I hope people, listeners, take this beyond the boundaries of just South Asia, and consider us as, okay, this is one demographic putting into words how they want to be treated and how they should treat. And other similar demographics may have quite similar feelings, or maybe they're different, but ask them about it. Don't apply your textbook principles to them, because it's not relevant. That's just the basic truth.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, especially picking up those contextual environmental cues, right? That applies to absolutely everybody. And we hear this in the medical community where patients are non-compliant, and you're blaming the patient, but you're really not sitting there thinking about what could I have done differently, right? Is there a communication error? Is this not relevant to that person's life, which is really important? And especially with older South Asians, and often it's generational, with OTs and other medical providers, people do not question those in authority, right? So I don't know how many stories I've heard of like OTs going in with these like ridiculous interventions, and they're not questioned. They just, the person will just comply, and then they're not following through because it's completely not relevant to them. But it's rude to say, no, I don't do this, no, I don't want to do this. They just nod and will do whatever you ask them in front of you, and then afterwards they're like, yeah, this was completely useless, right? So those are just things to keep in mind if you're actually asking and looking around and making sure it's relevant for this person.
Well, I just wanted to say, I also agree with Sujata and Sakshi that, yeah, the cues of, kind of picking up what someone's home environment looks like, or even, just discussing with them about what they really want to do, like really asking them, like putting that question forward is so important. Yeah, it's so important. And I suppose that if there are any students listening to this, I would just want to say that please ask a lot of questions. If there are any questions that you have that are around working with culturally diverse populations, like please go and pick out your tutors and your lecturers, because it's something that if they don't know the answer to, then they'll probably, follow up with someone who will know the answer, or that might be an indication to them that, oh, actually, this is really important and we should be talking about this more, and it will have that follow on effect. So yeah, asking a lot of questions, both as a practitioner and a student, is really, really important, especially in this cultural context.
I want to say that representation does matter. And while us South Asian therapists, we are using our voices to have these discussions, it is really important for OT faculty or the boards of state occupational therapy boards or the AOTA to recognize that there need to be more diverse voices in positions of power, in positions where they have in effect on what is published in a textbook or what kind of articles are accepted for a journal. For example, picking case studies, there are more diverse, eyes bringing input into that, because not only are you going to give better intervention to the populations you are trying to treat, you are going to get more buy-in from your own student population, from your employee workforce. And again, this is a slow change that is happening in the United States. I see more and more diversity and inclusion committees, and we need to keep this movement going. As people of color, we have to not feel like we are lesser than what we see in textbooks, which is mostly white people. We have to realize we're not lesser than because we speak with an accent. For example, I know so many friends of mine who will speak with Western accents, even though they speak just like me, completely understandable, completely legible, but they feel that to be more likable, they need to sound Western. I feel like people like me just fine, the way I talk. If you're likable, you're likable, you know. Also, little things like I refuse to go by Sue or Susie. No, my name is Sujata. You can say my name. Taking the time to, so that's again, understanding that. Like, for instance, that was a big cultural shift when I came to the US. I had a very tough time calling my geriatric patients by their first name, calling them Bob or Joanne. I would keep saying Mr. Martin, or I would say, and it was like almost I couldn't bring the word out of my mouth because of the conditioning of how we are. So it was a little offensive to me to like, hey, do you go by Sue? I'm like, no, because again, that's a very Indian or very South Asian thing, that you go by your given name, except like your family. Your family can call you a mashup of lots of names, but that again, that shows a lot of familiarity. So little things like that. Don't ask them, can I call you this? Ask them, what do you go by? Just like now we are becoming more aware of gender identity and how people identify our preferred pronouns. Ask them, what do you go by? Or how do I say your name? People will appreciate that. So just that, ask questions. It's important, but also for people in power, representation matters, and it's going to only enrich the profession because you are going to give better care. Your patients will then tell the doctor, like, oh yeah, that OT was good, she actually asked me about it, or because of her I could do this, versus cookie cutter stuff that because that is again a hurdle we are facing in the United States sometimes with reimbursement cuts and things like that. OTs have to constantly like reinforce our role and our relevance. And this is how we can also do it, by showing that we know how to treat a diverse population and we don't treat everyone in cookie cutter methods.
Those are all important, especially representation. But the name thing, so my maiden last name is Roy. Super easy, right? People don't expect to see this when they hear me talk, and my name is Sheela Roy, but most of us South Asians have some pretty long, complicated names, and anybody that you're working with, it's basic respect to ask them their chosen name. And if you're not able to pronounce it, practice, like ask them, is this correct?
I just want to add that I read something very stuck with me. I read something, I can't remember the person. It was someone who was African American who said that if they can say Tchaikovsky and Schwarzenegger, they can say my name.
Right.
You just have to try. You just have to try. And so I tell people, it's okay. Keep trying, you'll get there. That's what I say. If they're like, oh, can I call you something? So yes, you can say Tchaikovsky, you can say Sujata.
Yes, yes, you can, because my name, despite even with emails, I think even that sort of just shows, I want to say that how much the person in front of you is sort of actually being respectful of you, or sort of wants to connect with you. Even though, because there have been situations where Sakshi has been sexy or something of that sort, and sometimes, oh yeah, it's been there, and even the alphabet, they wouldn't get that right. So it's either SKS. My word, my name has been spelled in so many different ways on an email, where you just need to copy paste my name. That's all you've got to do. And I just go ahead to say that how much this person actually wants to connect. And I've actually said a no to a lot of people or not responded to their mails and just ghosted them, because that just goes on to say, despite me correcting them, saying that, for your reference, my this is how it's actually spelled, and they still don't get it. They still don't get it, and they repeat that. And to me, that's very disrespectful, because this is my name that you're using, and you wouldn't like it if I spelled your name wrong at least 3 or 4 times when it's actually there. You just need to copy paste it.
Yeah. And it's not that hard. I've worked in pediatrics. I've had 4-year-olds say my name right properly. I've had 92-year-olds with dementia say my name right because they liked me. They wanted to work with me. So if a 92-year-old and a 4-year-old can say it, the average person probably can if they try. So yeah, I'm so happy with that, Sakshi.
I know it says a lot about us, and I think we need to put the step down. Like, we need to put our foot down, because we are gaslighting ourselves all the time, that this is something that we might have been wrong, because we come from a place that does not have many resources, a place that does not have a lot of evidence or research going on. So it's probably our fault, or probably we need to look down. Probably this is how things are supposed to be done. We are supposed to follow somebody. But the idea of taking charge and making your own path and leading the way sort of does not is unacceptable somehow when it comes to being a therapist.
I think that's the perfect place to end. At the very end is the very first thing that absolutely everybody should be doing. Whoever you're working with, take the time to pronounce their names properly. It's the bare minimum. Okay, so I want to thank you all for being here and sharing your perspectives. I wanted to give you an opportunity to share how people listening or watching today can find you.
So hi everyone again. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something good out of this. My name is Sujata Martin. I am a pelvic floor occupational therapist working in Buffalo, New York. I do in-person care in New York, and I also do virtual sessions across states in the United States and across borders globally. You can find me on Instagram at concierge pelvic floor. That is kind of a mouthful, so I'll spell it for you: CONCIERGE, pelvic floor. Or you can find me at pelvicfloorbuffalo.com. Send me a hi. I hope you got something out of this. If you are a person of color and a student or a therapist, I hope this helps you find your voice. If someone says, hey, can I call you this, say no. And speak out boldly, speak your truth. Unless we take our stance and make our voices heard, no one's going to hear us. So I hope if you're a therapist or a student, you got that out of this. And I hope if you're a clinician, you got some tips to work with someone who doesn't share your cultural origins. So that's my little bit. Again, many thanks from Sujata here at Concierge Pelvic Floor in Buffalo.
Hey everyone again. You can, if you want to have a chat with me, if you're a student or if you're an OT, I'd love to definitely have a chat with you if you're an OT, but if you just want to reach out and have a bit of a chat about if you had similar experiences, if you're a student of color or also a South Asian OT student, I'd love to chat with you about some of your experiences. So you can find me on Instagram at Priya Raveendran, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next for South Asian OTs.
All right. Hi, everybody, again. So this is Dr. Sakshi Tickoo, and you can find, so I practice as a school-based OT, but I also have my private practice in home healthcare and telehealth. Just like Sujata, I practice with clients and students all over the world, global OT, so that's really fun. So if you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram, that is Sex, Love, and OT. So it's sex.love.and.OT. Or you can check out the resources, or you can still reach out to me on sexloveandot.com. That's pretty simple, right? Yeah.
All right. And so for those of you tuning in, if you have questions, if you have nice comments, please no trolling, or if you have any requests for stuff that you would like to hear more about in future episodes, you can reach out to any of us. My information, my website is otbayarea.com. And I'm also on Instagram at otbayarea. So I provide wellness and mental health resources and information. I also try my best to elevate BIPOC OT voices. So I have a group there, and I actually just started a BIPOC OT directory for US based practitioners, so we can refer out and really get that like culturally relevant care, find people that we can or refer people that are trustworthy, relatable, and like try to fill in some of those gaps in care. So definitely reach out, and hopefully we'll be seeing you all again soon.